Well, hello, this is Adam, and welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. Today, we're going to talk about the top facts, features, quirks, idiosyncrasies of my 1972 Monte Carlo. This car has 1,850-ish original miles on it. No, the odometer has not been around, so I don't want to hear it. This is an original 1,800-mile car, original paint. I still have the original tires for it as well. I swapped out with new rubber just for safe driving. But I do still have the original tires, and then original interior, original top, finished in Ascot blue. And you can see the seats and the door panels and the steering wheel, the dash and everything is just perfect. But today we are going to talk about, like I said, the top facts, features, quirks, and idiosyncrasies. So let's get started. 1972 was the last year of this body style in Monte Carlo. It was introduced in 1970. So it ran from 1970, 1971, 1972. And the 72 has some unique styling features up front. 72 was the year where they moved these turn signals and parking lamps into this area from the bumper. In 1970, they would be round lights in the bumper. 71, they would be rectangular. 72, they'd be gone from the bumper and up here in the grille. And they have this beautiful three-dimensional detail here of the Monte Carlo symbol. It's actually done in 3D, which I think is pretty cool. Now for 72, you also have the egg crate grille. This is a different texture than was used in 1970 or 71. So it's another thing that you can tell that differentiates the 72 from the other model years. And in 1970, there was no wind split molding. In 1971, there was a stand-up hood ornament with a wind split molding, and then 1972, they just put MC here, and they have this little mini wind split molding on here as well. So the 72 has a distinctive front end. We'll get around to the rear, but it's also a distinctive rear. But the biggest thing you can do to tell it is that egg crate grille, as well as the parking lamps and turn signals there inboard of the headlights. Now another little piece of trivia, these Monte Carlo emblems all look similar, but the 1972 doesn't really have any markings here, it's just a design. The 1970 actually has Roman numerals spelling out 1970, so MCM and then whatever 1970 is. What would that be? 1970, MCM LXX, that would be 1970 in Roman numerals. So the 72 and the 71 don't have either of those on here, even though this emblem looks very, very similar to what's on the other cars. Now you also see on this 1972 that you have these very thin bumper guards. This was starting to become the era of the 5-mile-an-hour impact standard, and 1973 would be the first year for that in the front, 74 the first year for that in the front and rear. So you have pretty dainty bumper guards on this car compared to what you otherwise would have. Now, as we rotate around to the side profile here, take a look at the hood and the length of this hood. This was an extremely long hood, and this car was really a response to the '69 Grand Prix that Pontiac had done, which also had a similarly long hood. And you're going to see the consequence of that when we pop the hood and look underneath. But for now, you can clearly see that elongated hood, a lot of it in front of the front axle. So there's good dash to axle proportion on this car, but you almost want to push that wheel further forward. But there's a lot of length that was added to this hood ahead of the front axle. You can also see this car has the optional fender skirts. Fender skirts did not come standard with the Monte Carlo, but this car has it. And it also has the turbine wheel discs, which were different turbine discs than what were offered on the Corvettes in earlier years, though they look similar. These do not have removable centers on them. They're one piece. The Corvettes actually had a removable center, and you could interchange them with the Riviera. They were the exact same. They sold the NOS ones with both centers. You could just swap them out. It was the exact same between the Corvette and the Riviera. These, like I said, are fixed centers. Now, as we look at the design of this particular vehicle, you have to remember that during this time frame, General Motors was big into the so-called four-fendered look. And this car clearly has a fender here. It's got a fender and a quarter. But notice that there's also a kind of sub-fender form here that starts with this crease or feature line and runs rearward. And then there's another fender that kind of comes out and creates that form there. So you have really a four-fendered car. GM designers were designing all these four-fendered cars during the time. I think Oldsmobile even built one. They were often called four-fendered Farkles because that was what GM's styling chief Bill Mitchell loved at the time. He just loved that four-fender look, kind of the old school Great Gatsby-esque era look associated with it. You also see this car has its Ascot blue metallic paint, and the light just breaks beautifully over these creases. I love also how this one just fades out gradually. This is some of the beautiful surfacing that GM Design did at the time just to have this fade out. Unfortunately, some of their surfacing is marred by sheet metal imperfections. Notice this little corner here is not formed all that well, and this gap isn't great. You know, that's GM quality for the era. Ford, I think, did it better. That's how you can tell these cars are original unrestored, that this sheet metal has an imperfection here. It's kind of imperfect here. You can see the gap is bigger. This is not a restored car. If you were to restore this, you would, get all these gaps closer and tighter. But like I said, this is a totally unrestored original car. Now, as I said, this was a response to the Pontiac Grand Prix, the '69 Grand Prix, and the personal luxury coupes were really taking off. This was kind of getting toward the end or the latter part of the personal luxury coupe craze. It really started with the '58 Thunderbird. That '58 Thunderbird was so successful that it kicked off the '63 Buick Riviera. And then that '63 Buick Riviera really kind of begat the '66 Olds Toronado, the '66 Riviera, the '67 Eldorado, the '69 Grand Prix. And then Chevrolet got jealous of the '69 Grand Prix and decided they had to have their own personal luxury coupe. So here you have the Monte Carlo. Now this '70 Monte Carlo is also a rush job because it was a response to that Grand Prix. And the designers didn't necessarily get everything that they wanted, although I think the car is especially handsome. But a lot of the designers thought the '73 Monte Carlo was better. Maybe not the final '73, but the sketches that I've seen of the '73 Monte Carlo that were in development, or that was in development, actually is quite beautiful. And that was more of kind of a clean car, shall we say, versus this, which was a last-minute vehicle. You do have also this rather upright C-pillar, which was characteristic of that Grand Prix of the era and luxury cars. This was not the fastback era anymore. Ford still had some fastbacks like the Torino that also had the Coke bottle styling, where if you look at that Torino, you'll see that you have the quarter panel goes up with the rear window graphic and also bulges outward. Here you don't have that. There's no bulge outward over the rear wheel here. So this is not a Coke bottle design. It has to bulge out, I should say up and out to be Coke bottle, like a Coke bottle laying on its side. This is not Coke bottle any longer, although it is a good looking car overall. You also have quite thin rocker moldings on this Monte Carlo, pretty understated, but I think it looks good on the car. I wish they lined up a little bit better. That would be nice. But again, the quality of that era from GM wasn't that great. Now you also have in the windshield something that was first introduced in the Grand Prix, and that is the antenna in the windshield. This little two lines that go up here, that's for the radio. That was introduced on the '69 Grand Prix, would proliferate across the GM lineup, but then was gone almost as soon as it began. People would complain about the radio reception. I never really had a problem with it. I thought it was pretty good radio reception overall. You also have, this car has the optional remote control mirror here, exterior mirror, and there's a little joystick control here. This was the same that was used on many different GM cars. The Cadillacs did not have the same mirror. But if you got a Pontiac or an Oldsmobile, you often had this same mirror. Buick sometimes had unique ones too. And this, I believe, was the last year for this chrome backing on this day-night mirror inside the car. Later they would become painted, which probably was a good idea because if the sun were reflecting into the windshield at daytime, well, then the person, let's say you're at a stoplight turning left, who's opposite you is going to get a little bit of a glare from that rear view mirror. All right, and let's rotate around now to the rear. You know, interestingly, this kind of has a wannabe flying buttress, I'll call it here, like the 68 Charger rear. It just has a little bit of that style. This back window is clearly not flush on purpose with the roof and the C-pillar. Gives it a little bit more formality, although interestingly not recessed at the bottom. But nice looking backlight, not curved at all. Of course, on the Caprice, as an example of the Impala, you would get the concave backlight on the coupes, which was pretty cool. And you'd also get a curved one on the four-door hardtops too. Now out back, we also have a unique treatment for 72, and that's this trim panel, which I think really adds a lot of dimension to the rear, makes it look wider, because obviously this is emphasizing the horizontal nature of the vehicle, and you have these vertical style tail lights, very similar to Cadillac. So of course this Monte Carlo, again being a personal luxury coupe, what was a predominant personal luxury coupe of the era? The Cadillac Eldorado. And you have a little bit, I would say the Eldorado, the 71 Eldorado also had that four-fendered theme, the so-called four-fendered Farkle theme. The 72 Monte Carlo, though, did not have the opera window. The 73 would have the opera window that the 71 Eldorado would also have in this area here. That was actually added by designers at the last minute on the 73 Monte Carlo to mimic the 71 Eldorado. So the Monte Carlo, the designers wanted you to think that you got a baby Eldorado in a number of ways, and well, the car wasn't as long as the Eldorado, had a shorter wheelbase and shorter overall length, but you did get some of those styling cues. No bevel theme here like the 71 Eldorado had, though. A very simple deck lid, very subtle crease here that just fades out beautifully on top of this emblem. Of course, you have this fold over here and this feature line that's, you know, standard, I would say, for the deck lid. But lots of cool little details. And again, I love that little trim piece that's running side to side or cross car. This car even has the original, this is just a sticker, dealer sticker. It was sold at Spec Chevrolet in St. Clair, Michigan. This sticker is actually in really good shape still. I've only hand washed this car. I haven't done anything else to it. And of course you have those teeny tiny little bumper guards. All right, let's go inside this vehicle. And you're going to see the first thing that's a quirk and idiosyncrasy. You ready? Oh, the key buzzer is horrid. Take the keys out here. And I'll show you one other thing. GMs of this era, very common door handles. They would go to a different style shortly thereafter. Now, one other thing I'll say on the GM cars of this era, if you want to open the door, you use the square head key, not the round key in this year. The square head opens the doors and is for the ignition, and the round one's for the trunk. They would later switch the round one to be for the trunk and the doors, and the square one for the ignition only. Now for 1972, you could only get one color steering wheel in your Monte Carlo, or even the Caprice. The Caprice and the Impala had a black middle section of the dash, no matter what interior color you got. Here, you got just a black wheel, and that's a cost savings move, clearly. This car has the standard belts too, which were black, not the deluxe belts, which had some color associated with them. You had to pay for color-coded belts. A relatively expensive door panel, though. This is real stitching here, but it goes all the way through to the other side and underneath, so somebody has to rotate this door panel to make sure the stitching goes all the way to the corner. Not necessarily easily done. Standard GM armrest. Interestingly, to open the door, you pull up on this as opposed to out. That's how you open these. And you got a little mini map pocket. That is literally all that it's going to be. This doesn't house much and isn't going to house much, but it is a little map pocket. Then we have the so-called crotch cooler vents for the air conditioning. This car is equipped with air conditioning. And Chevrolet was big into these safety knobs that had this padding. They're kind of squishy You can squeeze them. They actually have a nice feel to them. This car has the AM, FM 8-track radio. I have no 8-tracks. I have no idea if it works or not, and I'm not going to put a tape in there because I'll be afraid that it eats it after all these years. One of the smallest glove boxes in a car. You're just going to fit a few gloves and some papers in there. I've got the original owner's manual. And you do have this upper portion which is padded. This lower portion is hard. The HVAC controls, the fan switch is interesting here. You push it down to increase the fan speed. Vent position is not what you would normally think of these days, where it's just blowing at you from the upper registers. It's like a bi-level almost. This is a bi-level with the air conditioning compressor on. And I like that the Monte Carlo actually has a setting for max here versus having, just that you move this lever all the way to the cold side and then the max setting would automatically kick on with high fan. I prefer this setup. I'm going to close the door here. This is better, and I think this was one area where Chevrolet was really more advanced. And it doesn't even increase the fan speed on its own automatically. You have to do that on your own. This just opens the recirc door. So this would later become the setup for other GM vehicles. Again, you can see the door panel there. Nice rich cloth in the seats. A cost savings move on the headliner and the visors. There's no clip-in point here for this portion of the visor. And this one's sagging a little bit. What do you expect after 53 years? Pretty amazing condition for this vehicle overall. And just a kind of a standard rear seat, no center armrest anywhere. You do have armrests on the side. Of course, it's a hardtop, so you can crank the rear glass and put it down. And this car does have the optional comfort tilt wheel that you can move. I think it's 6 positions, but the column actually moves along with the wheel, unlike some later Fords. For whatever reason, this Perndl indicator, it's actually 3-dimensional. It's kind of a semicircle. It's hard to pick up, but it's not just flat. I don't know why they elected to do that, but it is kind of cool. Let's look under the hood, because there's, ooh, God, that's awful. Yikes. By the way, you can tell the assembly quality on these parts. These are all the shims they use to align the various body panels. You'll see these all over the car. That's how they did it back in the day. No under hood release for this. Sorry, no interior hood release. It's all under hood here. And I'm going to have to open this. This is a two-hand affair, so give me a second. Okay, so here we have the standard 350 cubic inch 2-barrel V8. And the first thing you notice, remember I was talking about that long hood with a lot of the sheet metal added ahead of the rear or the front axle. Well, take a look at the time tunnel here. This is the fan shroud. The radiator is way up here. And then in order to get this to work, you have this huge fan shroud and the cooling fan that's back here. You can kind of stand in this engine bay. Look how long the lines are for the transmission cooler. It's crazy. Relatively small air cleaner snorkel. Again, this is just a 2-barrel, but the 2-barrel on this car, this 350 2-barrel, it's a beautiful engine. It's so smooth, it's so quiet, it's got tons of torque. I just absolutely love it. You're not down on power at all, maybe at the upper end. Of course, the big GM Harrison air conditioning system and the A6 compressor there. And for whatever reason, Delco Moraine wanted to put their brake booster in upside down or stamp their name upside down. That looks bizarre, but that is the original brake booster on this car. Now, interestingly, this car was never installed from the factory with a protector plate here over the wipers. And I don't know, or the wiper motor and mechanism, and I don't know if that was a cost savings move or if it was just forgotten at the factory, because you can tell there's no witness marks on any of these places where it would screw in. So it just was never installed. But you can see the wiper transmission here, basically like a ball joint, and this motor just loops around continuously. Some of the Fords, they would actually reverse the current. So the wiper would wipe this way and then it would stop, reverse the current and go back. And the problem with that is that you get the gear train lash, you know, going back and forth. It's noisier. This was a better setup, a more expensive setup, and GM frequently used this on a lot of cars. Although some cars, even the N cars, like the Pontiac Grand Ams, Olds Achieva, Buick Skylark of the 90s, they did the Ford thing and reversed the current, I believe, because you could definitely hear the gear train lash on those. It also has the so-called articulating wiper for the driver's side. This, get this leaf out of here, this 4-bar linkage that allows the wiper to swipe parallel as it comes closer to the corner. And that's only on the driver's side, not on the passenger side. You just have a standard wiper on the passenger side, but you do have this 4-bar linkage on the driver's side wiper to provide better sweep action. Of course, the Rochester products, charcoal evaporative canister to take all those wonderful fumes from the carburetor and let you burn them appropriately. The GM canted master cylinder. I don't know why GM had those at an angle, but they did during this time frame. So tons of room underneath this hood because it was made to have this elongated style. Let's crank it up. These Chevy 350s of this era are just so nice, so smooth, so quiet. This is still running its original points and everything. Still has the original stock exhaust. Just a joy to drive and to listen to. The only thing that's not a joy is that oil fill plug, which is rubber. Getting that off, especially after all these years, I need to change it with a new one just because it's getting brittle and I don't want it to crack and go inside the valve cover. That would not be fun. And there you have it, the 1972 Monte Carlo. Quirks, idiosyncrasies, cool stuff, whatever you want to call it. Hidden wipers as well on this car, as is very typical from the era. I think the only problem with these, it looks cool, but you can imagine if you're driving in the snow as this wiper comes down, this wiper brings the snow from this portion of the glass up to here, and this wiper is going to push it down and compact it in a relatively small area. Not always that great. And we'll just take a quick look at the trunk here for a second. Pretty small trunk. You do have a full-size spare. That is the original spare BF Goodrich Silvertown belted tire. Here's the little BF Goodrich symbol. Never been on the ground. But you got this kind of cheap trunk mat back in the day. And of course now after 53 years it's degrading a little bit. And I won't touch it. But very, very clean under hood. Just a great looking car, great driving car. Not much, like I said, not much space. You had golf clubs. You're going to have to orient them like that. But hey, this was a personal luxury coupe. Don't need a huge amount of cargo capacity. So there you have it, the 72 Monte Carlo. Put a comment in the comment section. What do you think is the strangest quirk or feature of this vehicle? Thanks again for watching.